How you doing there? Reverend C.S. Millender II back for another round of reading of my illustrious work, the Omnavarian Codex, Antichrist Revealed. As we move forward in this video, I'm going to perform a dramatic reading of Chapter 5 entitled One Smile, but I suspect you're picking up on a pattern here. I wanted to briefly review what we learned in Chapter 4. You see, in Chapter 4, David just starts to reveal who he truly is. But the real question is, why? You see, David was very much content to play the role of a pet. He only revealed his true nature to that of Lilith. He loved Lilith, and he allowed her to be his mouthpiece. He was unassuming, quiet, and content. But when he was challenged, we begin to see the power of his spirit. There's an old saying that you really shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and, well, me myself, I'm the embodiment of that. You see, I'm what they call a Sigma male. I was challenged once by my sister, who thought she could slander my name, have me imprisoned, rob my home. She cut me off from my entire family, even stole every single picture of my family, of my dead mother and father, out of my house, just to hurt me. In so doing, I took 42 minutes to compose 3 letters, 3 simple letters, one to the IRS, one to New York State Benefits Department, and another to the Unemployment Department, and effectively destroyed her life. Now, it didn't take much. All it took was a challenge. You see, there are forces in this world that choose to remain silent. There are forces in this world that choose to allow others to play with its power. However, when challenged, those beings reclaim their power. And, well, all who oppose them tend to be destroyed. Now, you may ask why it is that I am the way I am. Well, I've already told you. I'm a medium. And in so being a medium, I express little fear of death. Always have. In fact, one of the spirits that I most summon is an entity you know as Santa Morta, the sainted death. She gave me 2 rules to live by when I was 16 years old. The first is to commit no misdeed by hand or tongue. This means I am not to steal, nor speak that which is untrue. The second is rather simple. When one marches into your land and declares themselves an enemy, they are to be destroyed. A fairly simple subset of rules, I must say. Yet, those who challenge me find them quite disturbing. You see, when you live by the first rule, you know that anyone who would dare declare themselves your enemy has done so to many others before. You know, quite consistently, that indeed, when they challenge one who is honest and true to his word in all things, that they are absolute and objectively evil, and this world needs to be voided of them. When you understand this, there is nothing that can defeat you. Now, join me, if you will, as we continue reading my illustrious work, the Omnavarian Codex, Antichrist Revealed. Chapter 5, entitled, One Smile. Time is a funny concept for me, and one of which I was actually opposed to when the Omna first discussed adding it to creation. I thought it would be wonderful if all things could occur simultaneously without regard for the consequences that the future would bring. I now understand why my creators would add such a thing to their creation. In time, I have experienced such joy, but far too many sorrows, and I am glad that I do not have to experience all of these things at once. There is a purity that comes with time. No matter what has hindered you in the past, time will eventually wash it away, and you can once again be free to experience joy, purified of the pain of the past. Yet, with time, joy will fade too. This concept took some getting used to for me, but after the events following my time in the Oasis with Lilith, I am truly glad my creators ignored my advice on the matter, if only because it would take a great deal of time to wash away the sorrow that I would endure. It was nearly a year after I arrived to free Lilith that we finally set forth back to her clan. The trip home was much more difficult for Lilith, as much of the vegetation had been destroyed in the vast lands between the Oasis and her tribe. But she made do. We eventually found our way out of the desert, and she was finally able to beckon the aid of the animals to carry her the rest of the way. I had no need of assistance, since I had been fully restored only days after I first awoke, even though my health was our official reason for remaining in the Oasis for so long. The truth of the matter was that we were both terrified of what we would find when we returned to the village. In hindsight, I suppose we could have both remained in that Oasis until Lilith's passing. A subtle, yet happy end to this tale. But Lilith had her obligations to her people, and I had an obligation to Lilith. So we braved the treacherous terrain to return to her village. It had been over 7 years since I ran out of the village, and 11 years since Lilith had laid eyes on her people. When we saw the village, it stopped us in our tracks. In the warm climate, the tribe had moved from the cold, dank caves carved into the mountains and built beautiful huts for everyone and decorated them with gemstones and furs. While this may not be a big surprise to you now, since you live in a time when developments pop up practically overnight, to us this was an absolutely stunning accomplishment. The two of us wandered into the village, staring at the buildings in utter amazement at the accomplishments of Lilith's tribe. As we made our way into the center of the huts, we were spotted by a young boy. Lilith smiled at him, and in response, he let out a terrific scream. Being that I was a jackal and Lilith's hair stood frozen upon her head like a rock, it made sense that we might inspire a bit of fear in a small boy. What happened next, however, made no sense at all. 5 huge, hulking men, covered in fur, came out of the hut snarling like beasts and launched at us. Without regard for my own well-being, I attempted to jump in front of Lilith, giving her a chance to get away from these beastly men, but she swatted me away, and I fell on my back. By the time I regained my footing, I saw the men were nearly on top of Lilith, but she had not moved 1 inch. Lilith stood frozen in her stance as the men advanced. Then, when they had nearly reached her, she opened her mouth and let out a terrifying shriek that pushed the men into the air like a tornado, tossing them through the huts behind them. Seeing Lilith flinging these men with the same power that I had summoned to free her, I suddenly realized that in all the time she had been frozen by the cold, she still had consciousness. It was the only way she could have possibly learned how to do this. If this was true, then she must have seen Eve smile and know that it was her that betrayed her. I have rarely been scared, but at that moment I was truly terrified of what Lilith might do. In Lilith's fury, she let out a terrible cry that rattled everything from the earth below her feet to the birds in the sky. Bring Namila to me! The village fell silent in response to Lilith's demand. After a few moments had passed, we heard the sounds of movement coming from the largest hut in the center of the village. Eve emerged from the hut, wearing a crown of peacock feathers and brandishing the diamond sword as that snake lay around her neck like a living necklace. Eve looked taller than when I last had seen her, and confidence flowed off her in waves as she seemed unmoved by Lilith's massive display of aggression towards her guards. Eve walked up to Lilith, then circled around her, snickering just a bit when she got a good look at her hair, then faced her foe and said, "This is no longer your land. These are no longer your people. You have no place here anymore. By my grace, you may leave this place unharmed, if you leave now." Lilith could not believe the arrogance of Eve as she pranced around her. She became enraged. In a single movement, Lilith reached up, grabbed Eve by the neck, and snapped it like a twig. As Lilith started to toss Eve's body to the side, the snake around Eve's neck lunged for her arm with its fangs, ready to take the life of my now tarnished Lilith. Without thinking, I leapt to capture the snake in my mouth, pulling its fangs away from Lilith just in time. I wrestled with that snake, trying with all my might not to let it gaze into my eyes. As much as I tried to control the snake in a fight, it proved far too slippery and slithered its repulsive form around me, nearly squeezing me to death before its head pulled back to sink its fangs into my flesh. You cannot imagine what it's like to live as long as I have, and finally face death. Yes, I can die, but not by mortal means. The secret of the snake came to me that night. How it could have obtained the knowledge to build the sword. Why it had attached itself to Eve, the second most powerful woman in the world, and taken its seat of power around her neck. This deceitful creature was not of this earth. It was a vile, wretched angel. I should have suspected that upon my perceived demise with the Omna, that God would want to protect humanity until it was time to harvest his three. But to send an angel to this land after what their kind had done to the Omna was a perverse act of contempt upon the memory of my creators. I would rather die than share this world with him. That snake struck from my throat. I felt its fangs brush against my skin. A flash of light blinded me for a second, and I shut my eyes. I thought, for a moment, that I had finally felt the sweet embrace of death. But I was wrong. It was something much worse. During my fight with the snake, Lilith had picked up the diamond sword, and the instant before the snake could sink its fangs into my neck, she struck the snake, separating its head from the rest of the body. What I did next forever changed the course of events for humanity and myself. A simple act that would ensure that I would forever be hated and hunted for the rest of my days. I opened my eyes. The head of the snake had rolled in front of me, so when my eyes opened, I saw who it was that I had wrestled with. While angels do not have any names that you could pronounce as they speak in energy waves, this angel is the one you have come to call by many names, most notably Samael, Hazriel, Abaddon, Apollyon, or rather simply, the angel of death. As I could see who he was, so too could he see who I was. And as the angel left the body of the snake, I heard him utter but one word before leaving. Preserver. As the life drained out of the snake the angel had inhabited, it traveled through the sword into Lilith. In an instant, Lilith's eyes clouded over and fangs protruded from her mouth like daggers. This, combined with her frozen hair, made her appearance monstrous upon my eyes. Seeing all that had occurred, I recognized it as my moment of defeat. Tens of thousands of years I had hidden from the angels, and in this one moment I had allowed my devotion to Lilith to reveal my presence to them. My beloved Lilith, whom I had spent so long trying to protect, had been made an abomination by her obsession with vengeance. I took a moment to reflect on time itself. It is amazing that one simple act could have such a profound reaction on the course of human events. A smile. Never has any singular act ever caused more death or devastation in all your history. If Eve had not smiled at her work that day, then Lilith and I would never have known that taking Lilith's crown had been her true intention from the very start. Lilith would not have spent her 3 years trapped as a frozen statue, plotting her revenge, and in the flurry of her rage been transformed into a monster. And my presence would never have been revealed to those murderous angels. As for you, that simple smile robbed you of more than you will ever know. But I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself again. Feeling the full effects of the devastating events that had just occurred, I simply did not notice that Aton had come out of his hut during my squabble with the snake. While I was still reeling from being discovered, Aton knelt beside Eve and tightly wrapped a cloth around her neck. By the time I turned around to check on Eve's body, I saw her standing, the cloth holding her broken neck in place while Aton stood at her side. The tree Eve killed that day in the field had granted her some immunity from such injuries, as well as its long lifespan. Lilith looked upon her husband with disgust. While love had never been a part of their marriage, loyalty was integral to their arrangement. How he could have married the woman who so callously ripped open his chest and turned against the one who had nearly died to yield him escaped her. This came as little surprise to me, however, as I knew him to be weak in all aspects. While we were away, Eve had secured his allegiance by allowing him to use the sword on a tree to gain longevity as she had. Lilith no longer cared for herself. Her only thought was vengeance. Lilith took the sword, and without regard for what hell may be unleashed in her for its use, lunged for Eve. But Eve had killed more than trees in her time with that sword. With the speed of a cheetah, she reached out and grabbed the nearest villager, throwing her between Lilith and her. The sword ran through the woman's stomach, killing her and the child she was carrying in her womb. Lilith was appalled that Eve would sacrifice the life of a pregnant woman to save her own. But that did not deter her in her goal. Lilith pulled the sword from the now blackened carcass of the woman and raised it again to slaughter that usurping whore Eve when something unexpected happened. Aton cried out for his gods. Out of Aton and Eve's hut came the most grotesque-looking creatures I had ever laid eyes upon. Men covered with fur of a lion and claws for hands, others covered with scales and fingernails that looked like the stingers of scorpions, still more with huge teeth like a shark, and so many more abominable creations. Eve once again looked Lilith dead in her snake eyes and commanded her gods to destroy Lilith. While Lilith was strong, an army composed of the most horrific creatures she had ever seen stood in her path to vengeance. Lilith started to flee, but was quickly surrounded by the beastly men. As I watched the terrifying scene, I was preparing to intercede in the fight when I heard Lilith whisper in my mind, "No, this is my fight." As the beastly gods came closer, Lilith began swinging the sword about like a true expert, twirling it in circles, tossing it back and forth from left hand to right. Then, when the beasts were nearly upon her, she knelt down on one knee before them. For an instant, Eve thought that she had won. But the sword was still swinging. Lilith bowed her head, and the sword came crashing into her frozen hair, pulverizing it. The cold sprang out of Lilith's hair like an explosion of ice and snow, freezing and killing all the gods that were advancing on her, and many of the villagers as well. The huts were all flattened in a flurry, and the lands were once again, as I had first found it, barren and cold, as it would remain for another 10,000 years. Eve and Aton had been flung back into the trees and gravely injured by the explosion, only spared by the spears they had taken with the sword. Lilith found Eve's bruised and broken body in the forest and kneeled beside the girl as she struggled to breathe, then whispered in her ear, "Now this clan is befitting of its first woman." And with that, she walked away, leaving Eve to a miserable, long life in a barren wasteland. The clan was no more, the world was once again cold, and Lilith had become a monster. I met up with Lilith that night, in the cave that she had once shared with her mother and father, to tell her I could no longer remain at her side, for the angels would soon be upon us. I told her to prepare herself for a fight, for if they knew what she had become, they would surely see to it that she was destroyed. That night, in the fire's light, Lilith revealed to me what power she had gained by killing that woman and the child in her womb by the power of the sword. Lilith's grotesque, snake-like features faded away as though they were never there. Her fangs retracted, and her eyes turned from pale yellow to their beautiful, deep brown once again. I believe even today you would have been amazed by the transformation of Lilith. Even though you have discovered the secret behind it, the fetus's stem cells allowed her to choose what features her DNA would display. Your science is yet to master this as Lilith did so many thousands of years ago. But one day you will. With the power of those stem cells, she became practically immortal, able to heal and regenerate from any wound. She vowed to raise an army strengthened by the sharing of her blood to combat the angels, so that if they ever came to terrorize this land, she would be prepared. I spent one last night with Lilith, then left when the morning's light hit the cave's entrance. I took one last look at this brave girl as she slept, one who had braved the harshest of lands and the cruelest of punishments for her crime of caring for her people. This world was more horrible than I could have imagined. If only I had all the wisdom of the Omni to guide me, I am certain that this story would have had a better conclusion. But mine is only a fraction of the knowledge of those wonderful beings that I once had the privilege to share this world with. I do try my best, you know. But as much as I try, I am a poor substitute for my creators. I knew the angels would be coming soon, and that's why I had to leave Lilith. You might think it was her becoming an abomination that would be the reason, but if you have a child, whether they are idyllic or murderous, you will always love them. I had to protect my Lilith from the angel's wrath. So, with a heavy heart, I set off into the cold, alone, once again. I did not know if I would ever set eyes upon my Lilith again. All I knew was that as strong as she was no match for the angels. And neither was I, at least not in my present form.